So now we have a whole lot of fun. We get to introduce someone who is currently in another country. That's one of the joys of Zoom. She is not experiencing the snow and power outages and internet outages we are today. So Alyssa DeRubeis joins us all the way from Montreal, Canada today. Hopefully she can wave at my parents as she's out there. Alyssa grew up in Golden Valley, Minnesota in the 90s, where wildlife and suburban oak groves and swamps kept her entertained. In 2013, Alyssa obtained a bachelor's in wildlife ecology from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. While attending university and for several years after, Alyssa worked and volunteered in Alaska, Arkansas, Belize, Ontario, South Dakota, Texas, the Upper Midwest, and Quebec. You could find her conducting bird surveys, nest searching, bird banding, and teaching children about ecology. Her travels led her back to the University of Arkansas, where she studied nesting and non-breeding birds in remnant and restored tallgrass prairies for her master's degree in 2019. She now resides in Montreal, Quebec. With more than 6 nest searching seasons under her belt, Alyssa has learned some of the secrets of breeding birds. She'll share some of those interesting tidbits with you this morning in her presentation, Hiding in Plain Sight, The Secret Lives of Nesting Birds. Thank you so much for being here and joining us today, Alyssa, and volunteering your time to share your knowledge with us.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me. I could talk about bird nests all day, so making this short enough was a challenge. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay. Not used to using these headphones, so like my voice sounds weird in them, but all right, let's go ahead then and get started. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start it from the beginning. Okay, I'm going to minimize this screen. Okay, so everyone can see my screen okay.
Yep, you're set.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to jump right into it because, again, I feel like I have a lot to say and not a lot of time. So nest searching is really interesting. It's not something that, like, I don't know personally a lot of people who enjoy nest searching or do it, you know, for fun or whatever. So some reasons why I personally really love to look for bird nests. It's a really fun challenge, right? These are things that birds don't want you to find, so they're going to try to keep it as hidden as possible. But at the same time, they can also be, like I said, almost in plain sight. I found some ovenbird nests that were within like a couple of meters of a busy hiking trail. So sometimes they're kind of right in front of your face, but it's still a challenge to find them. And it's really cool to witness a really important part of avian life history. I mean, this is why we have many songbirds traveling thousands of miles every year, right, to for a very short breeding season in Minnesota of like only 2 to 3 months. So it's an absolutely crucial part of the annual life cycle for birds. It's a great opportunity to home in those field skills, mainly patience, lots of sitting around and, you know, waiting for birds to do their thing, basically. And then learning to recognize suspicious behaviors, which I'll get into in a little bit. A lot of nest searching is focused on behavioral cues that, that birds give us. And it's just really neat to see these intimate moments. I mean, seeing these little teeny tiny chicks and these precious, like a little precious clutch of eggs is just incredible. And there's still a lot of mysteries to solve, which is why there's a lot of folks researching nesting success of birds. And I did that a little bit myself, actually. Before I get into it, though, I do want to talk about ethics, right? Because this is, you know, these are nesting birds, so this is an extremely stressful period. Hormones are running super high. And we just, you know, we want to minimize bothering them as much as possible. But I do think there's still a space where we can enjoy nesting birds, but while still respecting them. And by this, I mean giving them space and time. So space, I mean, you know, being as far away from the nest as possible while still be able to get a look at them. So like the common raven nest on the right, I really wasn't disturbing them at all. It was a really big nest. I couldn't, you know, even if I wanted to, I couldn't get closer to it because there was a big valley in between us. So, that was an okay nest to observe, and I didn't feel bad watching it. Also giving them time. So like, let's say you do find a nest. So like this was a Western meadowlark nest. I think I found in Minnesota. Can't remember where, but I think I flushed the bird off the nest. So she was sitting on it. And so I just snapped a quick picture. Usually I try to spend like 60 seconds or less at a nest site, and then I walk away. And then also if I find a nest, unless it's for research purposes, I try not to visit the nest again, because that just, with increased visitation, you get, very wary birds. And there have been studies on that where if there's a lot of predators around, and that could be people, for example, they don't come to the nest and they don't feed the chicks as much. So that actually results in a lower fitness of these young birds. And in extreme cases, they can abandon the nest. That usually happens earlier on in the nesting cycle, though. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then also, it's always a good idea to avoid well-known nest sites. So if someone's like, if all the birders in a local community know where there's a hooded warbler nest, might be best just to not go there, because there's already a lot of traffic. And again, we want to minimize the disturbance on these really vulnerable birds, right? Okay, so evidence of nesting birds. This is behavioral stuff that I look for as like a field biologist. If you see either a pair of birds or territorial dispute of some kind or copulation during the breeding season and the habitat's right, I always assume that there's going to be a nest if there isn't one already. So while those behaviors specifically won't lead you to a nest, noting the location and then maybe coming back in a week or so to see if there's any more like suspicious behavior. A really good one that's like for sure there's a nest is when birds are carrying nesting material. So when I studied dickcissels in Arkansas, I focused just on the females, because they're the only ones who build the nest, and they're usually the only ones who incubate as well. That's true across most songbirds, by the way. It's mostly the female, but the male will follow along and just watch her and not offer any of his help. I mean, I guess other than keeping an eye out for predators, but yeah. So they'll be carrying stuff in their bill, usually grass or sticks or something. Agitated behavior. This is also quite helpful, but it can be a little murky to know for sure if it's because, like if it's chickadees that are agitated that there's a predator, they could do that at any time of year. But if it's in the breeding season and they're like especially focused on you, there's a pretty good chance that either there's a nest or there's, there are fledglings nearby. By the way, I didn't mention this, but all these behaviors, they're used in breeding bird atlas surveys, and they're also, I think those are then adopted by eBird. So you can enter all these behaviors into eBird, which is pretty cool. But yeah, agitated behavior, if a bird's really like vocalizing very loudly by you and they don't seem afraid, they don't normally do that. There's usually only one reason why they do that. And then of course there's the famous distraction display. So we know killdeer like to do the broken wing display. But it's not limited to shorebirds. I've even seen dickcissels do it. I've seen ovenbirds do it. Bobolinks will do it as well. They just really try to make themselves look injured. So if it's in the breeding season and you see something like this, you're also probably by a nest. And then carrying food or fecal sac. If a bird's going to eat food for itself, it's not going to carry it around, and then the fecal sac is what they remove from the nest. So anyway, but going back to the food, if they're carrying it around for a while, they're feeding babies, whether it could be young babies or older fledglings, and that's based on the size of the food they're bringing. So if it's like a little teeny tiny beetle, it's probably really young chicks. This is a larger, it looks like a katydid that this female dickcissel's carrying. So I think this nest, the chicks were like middle-aged, middle to older aged. Oh, and then also, by the way, so for those excluding the first bullet point, for all those other ones, let's say I see a bird with nesting material, or they appear agitated, they're doing a distraction display, or they're carrying food or a fecal sac, you know, they're not, I don't know how close I am to the nest, but I try to walk in the opposite direction. Like I kind of go back to where I came from, and I keep an eye on the bird until, you know, they stop, until they like go to a spot that could be a nest site. So I usually try to back away and give them space, especially with agitated behavior, because that means I'm already too close for them to comfortably go back to their nest, which is usually what they want to do. And then this is something called a close flush. This is incidental. So this is just like if you're randomly walking around and there's a bird and it just seems to pop out, like you almost step on it, or it, you know, it's within a meter or so of you. A meter is about 3 feet, by the way. I use meters now since I'm in Canada. I'm going to show you a couple of videos that I took of ovenbirds flushing. Now these, I knew the nests were there. I had to, I unfortunately did have to flush. I don't like to flush birds off the nest. I avoid it at all costs because, you know, it's very stressful for the adult bird and they just want to be on the nest. So whenever I do this, I just look really closely at the nest, like does it have eggs or chicks, how old are the chicks, and then I walk away. And again, that is specifically for research purposes. I don't, you know, otherwise it's accidental. Okay, so here's a first video, and you'll want to look closely because this ovenbird, she sneaks away like a little mouse on the ground. And that's it. She's gone. I tried to look for her and she was gone. I'm gonna play it one more time because it was a pretty quick video. Let's see if it lets me do that. Here we go. So that's one where they're trying to be kind of sneaky and they're hoping that, you know, maybe I don't notice them. And then this is the one where like they're trying to distract you, and this scared me even though I knew the bird was in the nest. But yeah, she practically, you know, she didn't run away. She like practically flew out at my face. I'll show the video one more time. So if you're that close to a bird, you know, usually they're not going to flush that close if they're just, you know, preening or if they're foraging or resting or whatever. It's only if you're really close to a nest. So I was interested in what behaviors were the most helpful for finding bird nests, and I have a pretty large data set from my master's thesis on dickcissel nests. I found, I think it's around 110 nests. So this is based on that. So during the nest building stage, that is, by and large, I was observing birds carrying nesting material, and that's how I found the nests. During the egg laying or incubation stage, a lot of it was actually agitation, which is why I think that's a really good behavior to focus in on. But again, you want to make sure that, you know, are they agitated at you, or are they upset that there's like a general, you know, predator in the general area? And then during the brooding stage, or when there's nests or chicks in the nest, it was mostly birds carrying food is how I found that. I was gonna say something. Oh, so abandonment, I just want to say, like during the nest building stage and early on in the egg laying stage, that's the period where a bird is most likely, if they are going to abandon a nest, it's usually during that time, because they haven't invested a lot of time and effort into the nest yet, so they're not really losing a lot. So when I find a bird that's building a nest, I try to get out there as fast as possible. So I'm not, you know, discouraging her from that nest site. Okay, and then let's see. So the nest cycle of ovenbird, this is just kind of to give you an example of a timeline. And this is a species fresh in my mind because I worked with them the past 2 summers here in Quebec. So when they're nest building, it takes just a couple of days, but yeah, it's usually something that doesn't take, you know, they don't do it all in one day. So they start with like rougher material to make the kind of the outline of the nest, and then they'll use, you know, finer material to line it at the end. And then when they are laying eggs, it takes 3 to 6 days. It depends on how many, of course, it depends on how many eggs they lay. They typically lay 1 egg a day, and they usually lay it early in the morning. And I think this is true for most songbirds. And then incubation starts on the second to last day an egg is laid. So if there's 5 eggs in a nest, on the day that the 4th egg is laid is when they start incubating. And this is the longest period, I believe, probably in most birds, but certainly in songbirds. I mean, that's 2 weeks of just eggs being there on the nest. And then the brooding, or when there's chicks in the nest, that is much shorter. That's 9 days. It's 8 days in dick thistle, so it's really, really fast. And it makes sense for ground nesting birds because they are really vulnerable to predation. So they want to try to get out of there as soon as possible. And then the fledging period, which is when they leave the nest and they're no longer using the nest, is about 3 weeks long. So during this time, the parents are still feeding them. In some species, like black-throated blue warblers, are very ambitious, and they'll even start building and laying eggs while they're still tending to fledglings from a first nest, which is pretty crazy. I don't know how usual that is, but to me, that just seems like a lot. All right, and then I wanted to talk a bit about different types of nests, materials that birds will use, and then a bit about the placement. So the most common one that when we think of a bird nest is the cup nest. So a few examples. Yes, cups can be on the ground. This is a hornlark nest that has a brown-headed cowbird egg there on the right. It's the darker brown egg, and it's a brood parasite. So that's where the cowbirds will lay their eggs in another bird's nest, and usually the cowbird, outcompetes or grows faster or something than the nest it's laid in. However, well, at least with my study, all the dick thistle nests that had cowbird eggs in it, all of them failed. So, I don't know, we like to get mad at cowbirds, but most of their eggs do not make it. And then here's a ruby-throated hummingbird. They love to use lichen. I believe some flycatchers use lichen too. So, and that helps it, really helps it blend in. And this one, this nest is kind of interesting because, yeah, hummingbird nests, they really sit high above the branch. Usually they're kind of more like cup nests. They're usually more nestled into like the fork of a branch, but these guys sit up high. And some birds are very well adapted to urban environments, such as eastern phoebes, and they'll nest under eaves, house eaves, and bridges. And they always use moss. Hermit thrushes really like to use moss as well in their nests. And I'm sure many other birds, but those are the ones popping to my head. And then here's a western kingbird nest from South Dakota. And this guy it almost looks like fur. I guess it could be like thistledown. And there's some feathers in there as well. Lots of birds like to use feathers. I know great crested flycatchers will also use snake skin sheds, which is pretty cool. All right, and then the platform nests, we have a few. So here's a great hornell. This is like your typical, like, it's just a bunch of sticks. It probably makes a little, I mean, all of them make a little bit of a cup impression, but it's mostly like all sticks, and it's much flatter than a cup nest. Owls, to my knowledge, no owls build their own nests. So this was a nest probably built by a red-tailed hawk or an American crow. Here's a loggerhead shrike nest, and this is a used nest. And you can see there's actually little bits of I don't know what that is, some kind of plastic though. So birds will use whatever they find around them. So yes, they will even use trash, which is pretty sad. All right, and then we have pendant, which most of us think of oriole nests, but I didn't have any good pictures of oriole nests, so I'm just using vireo nests. So these are nests, they're secured to the branches above, and then the bottom of the nest actually hangs well below the branches, which is pretty cool. And it's very soft material. I don't even know what they're using there on the right. Almost looks like toilet paper. I hope that's not toilet paper. I don't know. But yeah, some birds really like to use different materials like that. Black-throated blue warblers, here at least, they love birch bark. So they'll peel off birch bark and put it on their nests. And then cavity nesters, yes, we think about woodpeckers, and they're the main ones who make the cavities. And there's a cool study, it's done somewhere in like a northern forest in North America, and it wanted to see what was the like most productive combination of woodpecker species and tree species to create cavities, because a lot of other animals depend on cavities, secondary nesters like certain flycatchers, chickadees, wrens, they all depend on cavities that are already made, owls. And the best combination was northern flicker and quaking aspen. And a lot of birds actually use nesting boxes. So we know the famous comeback of the eastern bluebird. Once we started putting up nesting boxes, their populations really rebounded. And tree swallows love to use them. Tree swallows also love to use feathers. And if you're a David Attenborough fan, if you like Planet Earth, there's a really funny bit on tree swallows competing for feathers to use in their nests. And we got birds like purple martins, where the eastern breeding population, they nest exclusively in artificial nest structures. And then I believe out west, they're more likely to use natural cavities. Okay, and then the mound, this is usually in a wet area. So it just kind of looks like a sloppy Joe of a nest, just kind of all piled on there. It's, yeah, there's not a lot of birds that do this. The only picture I had of a Minnesota bird was a common loon, but grebes are also known to do this, and American coots as well. And while they are pretty well protected, for ground nests, they're quite well protected from predators. It is prone to things like flooding. So you always got your pros and cons for where nests are. All right, and then we got our minimalists that make but a mere scrape. So they don't really, it's just basically on the ground. So we got turkey vultures in a cave, just kind of shoved in a cave there on the left. And I do like this spot that the killdeer picked. It found a nice little curved part of a rock to kind of make almost like a little cup. So that was cool. Yeah, so a lot of ground nesters will do a scrape, especially shorebirds. And then the burrow, I believe, the main one that comes to mind is belted kingfisher, but you could maybe argue, yeah, this is like into kind of into a muddy substrate, like a vertical muddy substrate, but I guess you could argue that bank swallows and northern rough-winged swallows do that as well. So yeah, and these kingfisher burrows can go pretty far back. Like I think a couple meters, I want to say. All right, and then this is one, I made up the term vertical mud because I didn't know what else to call it, but our swallows, they love using mud, and they'll attach their nests to a vertical structure. And cliff swallows are really interesting because they are, like cowbirds, they're actually also brood parasites, but they only parasitize their neighbors in a nesting colony. So that's pretty interesting. All right, and then we got the sphere. It is kind of like a cup tilted on the side, but it's usually a little bit more of a smaller opening. And some of the ovenbird nests, it's like the roof kind of falls in, and it's like, I don't know, the female just kind of shoves her way out of the nest. And then on the right there, actually, I found that that was at Crow-Hassan Park Reserve in Minnesota. And yeah, it was just, I think I saw an adult carrying food and went to like the thickest patch of grass that was nearby, and that's where it was. And yeah, it's very much like a globe. Marsh wrens do that as well. Oh, okay, so this is a great video. So when we look at placement, usually, I think of, each species is a little different. And like for, certain things they select for dick thistles, there's certain plants that they like blackberry, because they have nice thorny cover. And for ovenbirds, they usually do it in like right under a fern, and they'll like attach the roof to the bottom of the fern or the roots, or they'll do it in these club mosses. But I just want to show you how hidden some of these nests are. It's pretty insane. So check out this video. So I'm looking, just to give you reference, this is in Quebec from last summer, and I'm looking straight down. See if you can like guess where you think the nest is, and then you'll see where my video goes. Okay, ready? You have a spot picked. Where do you think the nest is? Okay, here we go. So that has a clutch of eggs, and it is just really, I mean, it's basically using, it's in like a slope. So like there's already kind of a roof there, so that makes it tough to find. I've had people ask me, Alyssa, are you ever worried about stepping on an ovenbird nest? And usually if there's a spot that I think there could be, could be a nest, I kind of look before I put my foot down. But they're so sparse that the chances of you actually stepping on one are pretty low. They're very widespread. Okay, I want to talk just a tiny bit about nesting success and predators, because that's something that a lot of folks are researching. So generally, okay, so nesting success, I'll back up. Nesting success is the likelihood that a nest will fledge at least one offspring. And so when we look at the different kinds of nests, the ground nests are obviously the most vulnerable, so they generally have the lowest nesting success. As an example, from what I've seen about, I think like for ovenbirds, if I did like a really rough calculation, but I think it was around 15% of them are successful. And then at one of my field sites in Arkansas, it was as low as 1%, which is pretty bad. Some of the other sites were closer to 20%, which was good. So it's not like all of them are 1%, but it can really vary by, by the site. And then arboreal, it's, a little tougher to access. Either you have to, be a hawk that can fly it or some animal that can climb the tree. And then if you're in a cavity, that's even better because you have to not only do those two things I just said, but you also have to be able to reach down into a cavity. So usually the cavity nesters have a higher nesting success. For ground nesting birds, this is true. This is probably true for a lot of other birds, but the number one cause of nest failure is depredation. It's not abandonment. It's not like weather related. It's because a predator found the nest, and usually they eat all the eggs or all the chicks. And predator communities, depending on where you are, you're going to encounter different predator communities, and also depending on when in the season it is. So up north, like where we are, it's a lot of mammals. So raccoons love ovenbird nests. They were the main nest predator. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that white-tailed deer, while they're herbivores, yes, they still need protein. So if they happen to be munching on something and there's a nest nearby, they'll eat the chicks. So from this study, we actually had a couple incidences of this, which leads me to believe that deer depredating black-throated blue warbler nests is more common than we think. This took place in Quebec, by the way, so I don't know if that's true for our very small population in northern Minnesota, but kind of something interesting to think about. And then down south, when I was doing dick thistle nesting success research for my master's, it was all snakes. And it was especially a lot of prairie king snakes, which is also intriguing because if you look up the species account, like the official species account for the prairie king snake, it says that they occasionally eat bird nests, bird eggs and chicks. But for dick thistles, it was the primary predator. And I think, all right, I'm gonna just show you really, really quick some cool and unusual nests. Mourning doves are super generalists, so you can find them reusing things like American robin nests, and they'll even nest on the ground sometimes, which is pretty crazy. Brown creepers have a cool cup nest that they actually put on the trunk of a tree, and it's shoved behind a loose piece of bark, which is really cool. Yellow warblers are known to be able to not only detect brown-headed cowbird eggs, but they build nests on top of it. And in one documented case, a yellow warbler built 6 nests, or it was 5 nests on top of, and each time, you know, a bird came, or a cowbird came back, laid an egg, and then it built a new nest and did that 5 times. And then hermit thrushes are really cool too. I don't have time to talk about them though. Maybe, yeah, if you have questions, you can ask me. And I am ready for questions.
Oh my goodness, that was awesome, Alyssa. There's a couple questions in the chat. One is Audubon Birdhouse book with a question mark. Do you know anything about the Audubon Birdhouse book?
I haven't looked at it, but I imagine it's useful. If it's by Audubon, I feel like they know their stuff.
Great. And then the next question was, what kind of camera are you using?
It's a, what is it? It's a Nikon D5200, and it has a zoom of 300 millimeters. Maybe I'll type it in camera.
Yep, that would be fantastic. And then the last comment was, in my opinion, good for research, but not for recreation. And I know you covered that at the beginning, but it's probably great to cover at the end about bird and nest safety.
Yes, yeah. So, you know, I think the main thing is that it's not a nest that you're going back to on a regular basis, which I know, you know, I have heard stories of people doing that because they want to document the nest changing, you know, the chicks getting older and all that. But you can do that with, if you want to put a trail camera on that. That's probably a better idea and it's less intrusive. And that's what we use in studies a lot. So yeah, and then spending as little time as possible at them. And, you know, and like, if you're uncomfortable with your presence at all, like it's, you know, that's totally fine to just go on YouTube and enjoy, you know, videos of the bald eagle nest or you know, the nest cams and all that to kind of get your fix of cute baby birds. That's totally fine too. I just find finding them a nice personal challenge, and it's really interesting.
And that, I think there's 2 last questions that were early on, and one I know is a challenge. It asked it, how do you know your presence doesn't harm the nesting process, such as can you lead predators to the nest? And I know when I was doing field work with snow geese nests, we had to be really careful to watch for whether the foxes were following us to the nests, and if our instructions were, if we ever had a fox at all following us, to stop the study for the day and come back another day. So can you address that with any of your research you were doing?
Yes, so that's still a topic of great debate in the bird in like the bird nest research world. There was a meta-analysis done a few years ago, and the conclusion was that humans don't really have an impact. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they actually discourage predators from going to nests. Maybe the human scent is something that the predator doesn't associate with food, so they don't follow that, or they're scared of humans, so they don't follow that trail. And also, you know, having said that, it is still possible that animals, especially like mammals, are using scent trails. So when I check on bird nests, or when I find a bird nest, I try to do like a straight trail through. So it's not like a trail that dead ends at the bird nest where I like turn around and take the same trail back. So I'll come in, maybe like, let's say this is a nest, I'll come in and check it. And this is for research. Or if I find a new nest, I'll do that. And then I just keep going straight through. So it's not a dead end scent trail.
And then I think there's 2 last questions. One had to do with video camera for nest watching. And I know here in Minnesota, you need permits for any nest video cameras you put up. And then the other one was, we do not support checking bluebird houses regularly. Are you able to address those 2 quickly?
Yes. So for the trail cameras, I used, when I was a grad student, I used surveillance cameras, which I don't recommend because I don't know, they were a hassle set up, but trail cameras work pretty well. And that's what we used for the study a couple years ago in Quebec. And making sure, although there's a whole they're such a hassle because they can, break at any time, and you want to make sure that you're setting it up well so it doesn't fall over, that vegetation doesn't get in the way, or else it's a total waste of your time. And yes, so then another thing too, so like when I'm doing research, like I said, if it's just something, a bird I happen to find in my free time, a bird nest, I try not to go back to it. In that case, I'm not checking it regularly at all. But for research, we do have to check it a bit more regularly because we use the data in, it's called daily survival rate for the nesting success that I was talking about. So we try to do it once every 3 days. If it's something where I have enough information to know, like if a bird's sitting on a nest and I know at this stage in the nest cycle she still has eggs, if she's still sitting on it, I can assume that she's sitting on eggs, and I don't flush her. I stay as far away as I can to look into the nest to confirm that she's sitting on there, and then I move along. But yeah, we try to do it once every 3 days, and we really try not to flush unless, we're not sure. Maybe she has eggs, maybe she has chicks, and we have to find that out for the daily survival rate data. But generally, we avoid it as much as we can, and we get out of there as soon as possible too. So, yeah. But definitely trying to check as irregularly as possible is ideal to minimize disturbance for sure.